There is a multi-billion-dollar industry operating in the United States that most Americans have never heard of. It is not underground. It is not illegal. It operates in office parks and warehouses across the country. It has trade associations, annual conferences, and lobbyists in Washington. It buys and sells human bodies, not organs for transplant. That's a separate, tightly regulated system. What we're talking about is everything else: heads, spines, knees, shoulders, skin, hands, feet, torsos. The parts of the human body that medical schools use to train surgeons, that device companies use to test new implants, that military contractors use to study the effects of blast injuries, that pharmaceutical companies use to develop new drugs. This industry is called the non-transplant tissue trade, and the people who run it are called body brokers. Here's what makes this industry unlike almost any other in America. You cannot legally buy or sell a human body. Federal law prohibits it. But you can charge processing fees for preparing, storing, and transporting human tissue. You can charge handling fees. You can charge for the documentation. You can charge for the shipping. And those fees, when you add them all up across a single body, can reach $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. The body itself, free. The fees for handling it, that's where the money is. Let me put some numbers around this so you understand the scale. The non-transplant tissue industry in the United States generates an estimated $2 billion in annual revenue. That number has been growing steadily for decades as medical technology advances and demand for human tissue and research and training increases. There are hundreds of body brokers operating across the country. Some are small, 1 or 2 person operations. Others are large companies with warehouses, fleets of vehicles, and contracts with major hospitals, medical schools, and pharmaceutical companies. The largest body brokers process thousands of bodies per year. And the families who donated those bodies, most of them have no idea their loved ones generated that kind of revenue for a private company. To understand how families end up in this system without knowing it, you need to understand how body donation actually works in practice. When someone dies, their family may be approached about whole body donation. Sometimes this happens at the hospital. Sometimes a body broker contacts the family directly, often within hours of death. The timing matters. A family that has just lost someone is in acute grief. They are not reading paperwork carefully. They are not researching the organization asking for their loved one's body. They are trying to get through the next few hours. The pitch is sympathetic. Your loved one's body will contribute to medical science. It won't cost you anything. In fact, some brokers offer to cover the cost of cremation in exchange for the donation. For families who cannot afford funeral costs, and many cannot, this offer is genuinely appealing. They sign. They believe they are doing something good. What they often don't know is the chain of transactions that follows. The body broker receives the body. They process it, meaning they prepare it for use or storage. Then they sell access to it. A medical device company might pay $5,000 to use the spine for a one-day surgical training seminar. A pharmaceutical company might pay for tissue samples. A military contractor might pay $15,000 for a torso to study blast injury patterns. A medical school might pay for a head to use in a surgical training course. The same body may generate revenue from multiple buyers over its useful life, which can be weeks or months depending on how the remains are preserved and used. When the body's useful life is over, it is cremated. The ashes are returned to the family. The family received free cremation. They got exactly what they were promised. They just didn't know their loved one was, in effect, a revenue-generating asset for a private company that may have sold access to their remains to a dozen different buyers. Now, I want to be clear about something important before we go further. Whole body donation is a legitimate and genuinely valuable thing. Medical education depends on it. Surgical training depends on it. The development of new medical devices and treatments depends on it. Without donated bodies, medical schools cannot train the surgeons who will operate on your family members. The problem is not donation itself. The problem is the near total absence of transparency about what happens after donation, the near total absence of regulation governing the industry, and the cases, and there are many, where the system has been abused in ways that are deeply disturbing to the families involved. The Reuters investigation into the body broker industry, published in 2017 after years of reporting, was one of the most significant pieces of investigative journalism of that decade. Reporters documented how body parts were bought and sold across the country with almost no oversight. They found bodies being sold to buyers who were not who they claimed to be. They found tissue being exported to foreign countries with no legitimate medical research purpose. They found consent forms so vague that brokers could interpret them to permit almost any use of donated remains. And they found something that, when I first read it, I had to read twice to believe. They found human remains being used at commercial events, trade shows, sales demonstrations, situations where body parts were present not for medical education but to demonstrate products to potential buyers, human remains, at trade shows. People whose families believed they had donated to science, used as props in sales presentations. The brokers involved argued that their consent forms permitted scientific and educational purposes and that product demonstrations qualified. Whether that argument is legally defensible is almost beside the point. The families who found out were not thinking about legal definitions. They were thinking about their mothers and fathers and spouses being used this way. After the investigation was published, several states opened investigations. Some brokers faced criminal charges. The FBI began looking at specific cases, but the industry itself continued operating. Because even operating poorly, even operating unethically, was not illegal under the existing framework. The regulatory landscape governing the body broker industry is, to put it plainly, a mess. At the federal level, the National Organ Transplant Act of 1984 prohibits the sale of human organs for transplant, but it does not cover non-transplant tissue. The FDA regulates some tissue products, primarily those processed and implanted in living patients, but it does not regulate the initial collection and sale of whole bodies or body parts for research and education. At the state level, laws vary wildly. Some states require body brokers to be licensed, others have no licensing requirement at all. Some require consent forms that specifically explain how remains will be used. Others accept language so vague that brokers have enormous latitude. There is no federal licensing requirement for body brokers. There is no mandatory inspection system. There is no national database tracking where donated remains end up. There is no requirement that families be notified when their loved ones' remains are sold to a third party. I want to tell you about one specific case that illustrates the human cost of this system. A man in Arizona, I'll call him Robert, died in 2012. His family donated his body believing it would be used for medical education. They were told his remains would be cremated and returned within a few months. 14 months later, they received an urn. 3 years after that, an investigative reporter contacted them. Their father's body had been sold to a military contractor. It had been used in blast testing, experiments designed to study what happens to the human body when exposed to explosive detonations. Robert had been a veteran of the United States military. His family had not consented to this, not specifically. The paperwork they signed had language buried in paragraphs of fine print that permitted use for scientific purposes. The broker interpreted blast testing as scientific. Legally, they may have been right. His daughter told a reporter that she felt like she had failed him. She hadn't. The system had failed her. If you or your family is considering whole body donation, ask specifically who will have access to the remains. Ask whether they will be used for commercial purposes. Ask whether any portion will be sold to third parties. Get every answer in writing before you sign anything. If a broker contacts you within hours of a death offering free cremation in exchange for donation, be cautious. Legitimate programs do not operate this way. They welcome questions. They provide clear, specific answers. The body broker industry exists because there is genuine demand for human tissue in medicine and research. That demand is not going away. The question is not whether this industry should exist. The question is whether an industry that handles human, remains and interacts with grieving families at their most vulnerable should operate in the near total absence of oversight that currently defines it. Right now, the answer from Washington is essentially yes. Until that changes, families who donate are operating on trust. And as we've documented throughout this series, in the funeral industry, trust without oversight is not enough. Next week on Coffin Ledger, organized crime in the funeral industry, the mob's surprising and disturbing history in the death care business, and what it reveals about an industry that has always been vulnerable to exploitation. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to know. Every industry has a coffin. We track what killed them. This is Coffin Ledger.